The federal election is just around the corner, and for the last few weeks we've been listening to all these muppets from Canberra tell us all about how life will be so much better with them at the helm of the ship.
Living relief when it's needed right across the country.
Well, it's 12 months to be reviewed at the end of that period. And
you might do it again.
Well, if we think that there is a longer period of recovery required from Labor's mess.
The public are fed up. Most of the public that I speak to don't follow politics, right? They're not interested. They distance themselves from it.
We could take them at their word and just believe everything they say, but as people do say, you can tell a politician lying because they open this hole under their nose.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. We need to price carbon. Pricing carbon is the right thing to do, and I said that during the election campaign.
No, you did not.
But if you do what we've always done, you'll get what you've always got. For a bit of a deep dive into what these different political parties have to say about what things that affect us as four-wheel drive enthusiasts, as campers, as people who use the bush. What sort of things are they putting on the table that affect us? There's two main things. That is national parks and handing back land to the Indigenous or the traditional landowners of Australia.
He has seen every Prime Minister since Gough Whitlam, and every single one of them had made promises. Every single one of them had determined to do better, and every single one of those promises was broken.
Two things that definitely are contentious issues are two things that will divide us by nature, and they are things that well, each party has a particular opinion on. And before we get into this, it's important for me to tell you that I am not affiliated with any political party. I hate all politicians equally and all political parties equally. I think anybody who is a career politician, that is someone who comes out of university and enters politics and you've never actually worked in the real world, you are that out of touch with what you and I go through each and every day. It's really hard to take you at face value. I firmly believe that politicians want two things, that is money in their pocket and another term in office, and that's it. That's all they care about. One of the best tools I think that exists today for politicians is division, and that is dividing you and I from different opinions, if you like, and it's a tool that is used day in, day out by all parties, so we're not looking too closely at what they're actually doing. And if you don't believe me on that, well, let's not talk about the voice referendum or anything like that. That was the most divisive thing I've ever seen in the history of this country. But if you're over 40 years old, you think about life, say, 20 years ago and how much better it was back then. And this is not something I'm going, oh, look back on the good old days or anything like that. I'm talking about how less the government was involved in your life, how new laws weren't being introduced every freaking day, it seems, to impact your life. You can't look at 20 years ago and say, my life was not better off. Or even 15 or even 10 years ago. You were better off then than what you are now. We used to be able to disagree on things. We used to be able to say the sky is blue and someone else would say it's pink, and it's okay, we can still get together and have a beer afterwards. But these days, if I say the sky is blue and you say the sky is pink, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. Everything that I say from now on, you're going to hate everything I say. It's just, we're so divided now. It seems that people all over social media, we've gone from people being absolute world-class epidemiologists because they know how to Google something, and now the pandemic is finished, we've moved on to, I know everything there is to know about Indigenous Australians, or I know everything there is to know about a national park, or everything there is to know about green energy and nuclear energy. All these armchair warriors seem to be dividing us even more, and it's a great tool for politicians. So when it comes to these two things, national parks and Indigenous land ownership, because they do impact us as four-wheel drivers and bush users, where do the political parties start, or where do they sit on that? Well, let's have a look at national parks first. In the last 20 or so years, there has been a real significant change in the way that we manage our bushland here in Australia. About half of our state forests have been converted into national parks in that 20 years. It's like 2.5% per year. It's a lot of land that's being taken from state forest and put into national parks, and that changes the way that you and I can use it. State forests used to be like absolutely buzzing most weekends with camping, four-wheel driving, areas of logging, hunting, camp. It was always people out there enjoying the bush. But now, when it's a national park, it's More often than not, it's all locked up behind gates, no trails are being used, no wood's being collected to burn your campfires, all that sort of stuff. The decision to do this is generally made by people who don't actually use the bush. So we're in that situation, and remember what I said, money in their pocket and another term in government, that's where these votes come into play. In fact, it's a little bit like the green movement where wind turbines and solar panels, and I am no expert at all, but these things are being placed in places where there are minimal votes. There's not many people there, so the government really doesn't give a shit who they piss off to put these things there. But you're not going to see wind turbines or solar farms where the cities are, because that's where the votes are. They're out where the votes don't really matter. And I would challenge you to find any, if many, people in those places where those things exist, where they go, yeah, love having it here. It just doesn't happen. So the people pushing it are not the people who are actually being impacted by it. Get what I'm saying? Division, more division. So state forests and national parks, state forests, they are managed differently. They are managed with logging, camping, recreational four-wheel drives, hunting, all those sorts of things in mind. And what that actually means is three major things. Regular thinning of the bushland. Like, look around where I am here. This is a state forest. This place is not going to burn too hot. Along with that is like the fuel reduction in the amount that's out here on the ground. Fire trails are all over the bush out here. So if there is a fire, the fire units can get to that front line pretty easily. And they, not here as such, but we do a lot of wood collection here for domestic firewood. But in many places they do controlled burns in state forests. Whereas in national parks, it's more about conservation of the land. So there is less controlled burning, if any at all. There is less access for people like you and I to go in there and pick up wood to use for firewood. There's no fire trails, gates are locked. They just don't get used nearly as well as what the state parks do. And that all sounds good, hunky-dory on the face of it. But in a bushfire situation, all that undergrowth, all that fuel on the ground turns into an absolute bonfire. Let's talk the Black Summer bushfires 2019-2020 and all the native wildlife, that is, wombats, goannas, lizards, snakes, wallabies, all those things were killed, not to mention all the people that were killed as a result of those bushfires as well. And that's not a one-off situation with that particular fire. These things happen, they seem to be happening all the bloody time. Every year there seems to be like another massive bushfire that's like nuclear in the energy that these bushfires are pushing out. I guess the question is, did locking up the bush make it more of an issue? Did turning these state parks into national parks make it more of an issue for things like bushfires? You could go and ask some old timers around who were well and truly into their life when these things started to change and before these things started to change. And you can ask them, is it any better or worse? Now, what was it like back then? And they will, almost all of them will say, we never had fires like this. We used to clear the bush. We used to keep fire tracks. We used to do controlled burns all the time. And that has kept them reasonably safe, not perfectly safe, but reasonably safe from the big fires that would happen. When I talk to mates of mine who are in the CFA, they're pretty much unanimous across the board. They'll say there's no controlled burns anymore. That's why when you have a big bushfire, there's so much fuel there. And you'll get all these people who go to university and stuff and they'll talk about, no, that's not what happened at all, blah, 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 blah. Division. It is definitely a fair argument to have to say that when we were doing controlled burns, we were having less intense bushfires. And some people will blame climate change on this, and some people will just blame bad management on this. What do you think? Which one is which? It just so happens I see in all the data that you see when you look online, and I am no expert, as I say, but it's funny how so many national parks have increased, and so has the amount of fires and climate change and global warming and all that sort of business. I don't know, I'm a little bit skeptical of that at all. And let's not pretend that land management and national parks aren't political. These things are political hotcakes. So where do each party stand, the major ones? Where do they stand on national parks and state forests? The Australian Labor Party generally, they support expanding the national parks. They prioritise biodiversity, Indigenous land management. We'll talk more about that one very soon. They're more cautious about burning off. They prefer long-term ecological planning. Now, that could just mean we'll just let that shit burn. Don't know. Then we have the Liberal National Party, and they are generally more about state forests and leaving the forest in state hands. They are against locking up the bush, and they tend to lean more towards the local landholders, the farmers and things like that because of the National Party aspect. But I can tell you now, in our hometown here, was it last election? Last election actually gave us $2.5 million before the election. Can you say pork barrelling? And even the election before that, they promised the same $2.5 million to extend our runway in our little hometown so that the air ambulance could land there. Not to mention there was a road at one end and a Bar Creek at the other end, so you couldn't extend the bloody thing anyway, but somehow they gave $2.5 million to the local airfield. And that was, well, a whole election cycle ago. Nothing's happened. Don't know where that money is. Then we have the Greens Party, the Labor Party that is wearing a green suit. They are against burning off things. They are all for national parks and conservation, and they focus more on climate action, carbon reduction in carbon emissions, things like that. So they certainly push for the national park side of things in this argument. Be real, there is no one size fits all in this argument. I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all. Again, division. You could have more national parks, more biodiversity, more long-term preservation of things, and I don't think anybody in any community doesn't want to preserve the bush. I don't think that's the case. But if you have more state forests, you have more access, more management, and probably less fire risk. Probably. Firestorm does hit and fire crews can't get to that fire because the fire trails are all grown over and they can't get their units down there to fight these fires, or just the gate is bloody well locked and they can't get in there. There's definitely argument for this. You have to ask, are we managing the bush or are we just letting it burn just for political points in the city? There's another thing that's happening in Australia, this movement to return land or give land or hand back land, however you want to term it, to the traditional owners or the Indigenous Aboriginals in Australia. It has cultural significance, it has historic significance, but most of all, in the situation that we're talking about here, it has political significance. It affects all of us who use the bush. What does that mean for us, the people who go out there four-wheel driving, fossicking, people who are camping, hunting, all that sort of stuff? How does this giving land to what's going to call traditional landholders, how does that affect us? Because it doesn't always mean that we're giving public land away. It doesn't always mean that. Always co-management, as in the government still owns it, but the Aboriginal folks, the traditional landholders, they manage it, just like that. Just like what they do in Kakadu, and I don't know, I kind of think that works pretty well. And lastly is take full ownership. They give everything that is on the table to the traditional landholders. Sometimes it's just some symbolic, sometimes it's a full handover. There is no cookie cut approach to any of this. Everywhere, all around Australia, it seems to be done kind of, it's almost ad hoc. No rule applies the same everywhere. Always, it is recognising the oldest civilization on Earth and recognising their connection to the land. More and more Aussies are starting to get this now. Aboriginal people have been dealing with this land and apparently doing it quite effectively for tens of thousands of years. Whether they were just managing it or whether they were just dealing with what was happening around them, who really bloody knows? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that. They apparently dealt with the fires just fine. They did their cultural burning or whatever the situation is well before we came here, before the white fella came here. So you've got to look at it holistically. So plenty of people look at it like, well, after a couple of centuries of dispossession, it's time to give it back, I guess. Which is kind of weird. I don't know where I stand on this, to be honest. Places like Uluru, Kakadu, Fraser Island or Kagara, how is there an apostrophe in there? Did Aboriginal folks even have like a language, like a written language where they actually had apostrophes? I don't know. How did that work? I don't know. But that's all been handed back and it seems to have been done fairly successfully, I guess. There's always going to be people that are upset about this. When we talk about Ayers Rock or Uluru, people will say, oh, I remember climbing that when I was a child, and now my children can't do it, and it's a disgrace, it's disgusting, and all that sort of business. And I kind of agree with that to an extent. I really think the way that we deal with this particular subject, because it is sensitive, it's sensitive to the people who are actually affected by it. Not the people who just want to be affected by it and play the victim, but the people who are actually affected by it. And I feel for those people. It is just done so badly. There are definitely people around who will find things and go, I'm not reporting this because it's going to affect my land, the land that I've purchased with my own money. I know there are people out there who do that. But if there was a cooperative way of dealing with these things, it would be just so much better. But it's not. Division. Too much frigging division in this country at the moment. Where do the big parties sit on this matter? Where do the Labor Party, the National Party, the Liberal Party, and the Greens, where do they all sit on that? It's pretty well the same as the other situation. The Labor Party are strong supporters of returning the land to traditional owners. They're working with traditional owners for joint management. If that was the way it was done, and that's the way that it was only done, I don't know, I think that might actually be a reasonable solution. They're also backing like cultural backburns. In fact, where we are here, not far out of my hometown, a little while ago I got a letter in the mail. I couldn't burn anything off, we're outside of the fire burn-off season, but we had a notice that traditional land burning was happening. I guess there's one rule for one and one rule for the other. I don't know, but we got a note that it was happening up here. I didn't see anything. I don't know if it actually happened, but we got a note that it might be happening. The Liberal Party and the Nationals, see, this is where it comes in. You look at the way that these guys behave, and you look at what their official stance is, because it's at odds with each other. They support joint management in places, but raise concerns about access and tourism and just general bush use. Like they're like, oh, we're okay with it, but we've got some conditions about it. They're very, very wary about giving full control to the traditional landholders of that land. And the Greens, well, they just want to give everything away. The Greens just want to give everything back to Indigenous Australians. They advocate for sovereignty recognition. They advocate for treaty and reparations. Reparations I am absolutely dead against unless you have personally been affected, like the stolen generation, things like that. But I didn't do anything to anyone. Why should I pay for something, give money to someone who has had nothing happen to them just because of the colour of their skin? That to me is racism. But anyway, we move on. Get that they are very, very touchy subjects. I get that. I get that. Like, some people get absolutely riled up about this. And because we get riled up about it, we will never friggin' agree on any of it. Ever. Some people will hear land back or handing land to traditional owners, and they will think, great, I can't take my friggin' Hilux out the bush now and have a camping trip with my kids. And in some cases, you won't be able to do that. In some cases, you'll still continue to be able to do that. You might have to pay a fee, just like you have to pay a fee to many national parks all around the country to go camping. And that may still be the case if that land was owned and managed by traditional owners. In some cases, you won't be able to go there at all. But there is another side to this. Like traditional owners, like the rangers, like the Aboriginal rangers, are absolutely on the ball when it comes to land clearing with fire. They do a lot of fuel reduction burns themselves. They actually look after the bush, I think, in many cases better than what the national parks are looked after. And when you get looking into these things, I think you're going to find that there's a lot of traditional landowners who are actually all for tourism and camping and things like that. They just want it done in a respectful way. Like, they are not the enemy of people who don't want the bush locked up. I think that there is a good solution to it all. That returning the land, it also means returning that knowledge. In some cases, I'll talk about that in a second, but I think it helps do what needs to be done to the land. I think they can do it quite respectfully and effectively when the traditional owners do it. Some people will say we are being locked out of our own country. I partly subscribe to that chain of thought. Other people will say it was never ours to begin with. I kind of subscribe to that thought as well. You see, somewhere in the middle, I think, is where the truth really lies and where the solution really lies. We all love the bush. Everyone out here that's using it loves it. You wouldn't be out here because it's not easy, but you wouldn't be out here if you didn't like being out here. And if these guys have looked after it, whether they've looked after it, whether they're just a result of being there, as in whether the bush looked after itself or in spite of them or because of them, I don't know. But they did something right, and they did it for tens of thousands of years apparently. Look, here are my 2 cents. Maybe, just maybe, we stop working against them and start working with them. How about we stop the frigging division and work out what is best for everybody, because there is common ground here for everybody. Because I, just like millions of other Australians, well, I was born here. We don't have a choice in where we were born. We don't have a choice in who our parents were. We are all Aussies. It's as simple as that. And if we can't work with each other and we keep on dividing each other, well, we're screwed, aren't we? I think that the traditional owners who have the knowledge, those who have passed the knowledge over and over and over and over again, because although Aboriginal folks make up less than 4% or 3% of the population, it's a very small amount of people, even less of that number would actually know how to look after the bush. Yeah? Not all of them do. Just because the colour of your skin doesn't mean you know what you're doing. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't happen that way. Those people who do know how to do it, I think that the land should belong to all Australians, all of us. And the people who know, those traditional land owners who knew or know what to do and how to manage the bush, I think they should manage the bush everywhere, all over the country. There is a solution there to be found. The downside is that these days it's such a hot freaking potato, no one wants to talk about it. You're considered to be a racist. I guarantee you, when you finish this, look down at the comments, I promise you, someone there is going to call me a racist because we're talking about this. I'm not a racist, there's not a racist bone in my body. But I guarantee you there is something down there, I promise you. I reckon, have you gone camping, four-wheel driving on land that is owned and managed by traditional owners? Have you done it? What was the experience like? I'm curious as to what it was like, because I think there is a solution there. I don't think any of the parties at the moment, the major ones, have got a freaking clue, to be honest. They're just divided on what they want to do. No one wants to make the hard decisions, have the hard conversations. It is worth noting that this is a small little segment of what these parties are talking about in the upcoming election. There are so many other things that they're talking about right now, and you need to be across all of it, because your vote is the currency of the political system in Australia. If you want to have your vote counted, go out and do it. When I was a young fella, I used to do donkey votes all the time. Now I'm not going to tell you what I do now. That's up to you. I don't want to influence anything that you guys are doing. Do your research, see what they're doing, believe 5% of what they're saying, and you'll probably be on about the right point there. Anyways, that's it for today, guys. I'll see you next week.